Don't expect much from Mum this year. She's broke." The words cut through the laughter like a knife. My son raised his glass, smirking, while his wife chuckled at my expense. Even the grandchildren looked at me with wide, confused eyes, like I had just been unmasked as a failure at my own Christmas table. But what they didn't know was that the quiet man seated at the far end of the table, the one they barely noticed, was not just another guest. He was the bank manager, and he had come with papers that would turn their laughter into silence. "My name is Marion Whitfield. I'm 72 years old, widowed for more than a decade, a mother of 2 children, a grandmother of 4. I spent most of my life as a school librarian in Ohio, stretching pennies, teaching children the value of words, while my late husband, Robert, built his small contracting business with his bare hands. Between us, we didn't have much glamour, but we built a life that was steady, dignified, and debt-free. At least, I thought dignity still meant something in my family. Christmas dinner that year was held, as it had always been, at my house, the red brick home Robert and I bought 50 years ago, the same one I still keep spotless, though my knees complain with every flight of stairs. I'd decorated as best I could. A tall spruce tree glowed in the corner, the smell of pine mixing with cinnamon and cloves. I'd baked pies, roasted a turkey, polished the silver. It mattered to me, even if the others never noticed. The family arrived in their bursts of noise. My daughter Evelyn with her 2 little ones clinging to her coat, my son Daniel in his pressed shirt, his wife Lisa trailing behind with a bottle of wine she'd clearly just picked up at the grocery store. They smiled, hugged, took their places, filled the air with chatter. For a moment, I almost believed things were still as they used to be before distance, before money, before that unspoken wall had crept between us. Dinner stretched into laughter and clinking forks. The grandchildren whispered and giggled, sneaking extra rolls when they thought I wasn't looking. I passed plates, filled glasses, tried to memorize the picture of family around me. But beneath it all was that faint unease, the way Daniel hardly looked at me, the way Lisa's smile sharpened whenever money came up in conversation. And then it happened. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his fork tapping against his plate. He raised his glass like he was about to toast, and for a second I felt a flicker of pride. Maybe, just maybe, he'd acknowledge me, his mother, the woman who'd given him everything I could. Instead, his voice carried across the table, light and cruel. "Don't expect much from Mum this year, everyone. She's broke. No gifts coming from her." The words landed like stones in my chest. Laughter bubbled around the table, awkward at first, then bolder, as if he'd said something clever. Even the grandchildren looked up, confused, before Lisa chuckled and added, "Well, we all have to adjust when times change, don't we?" My face burned. My hands folded in my lap trembled. I looked at Daniel, my own son, and saw no apology in his eyes, only smugness. Amusement. As if reducing me to nothing, broke, useless, irrelevant, gave him some measure of power. I wanted to speak, to tell him the truth, that I was not broke, that I had lived carefully, planned, saved, and that what Robert and I built was still here, solid and untouched. But the words stuck in my throat. The humiliation was sharp, raw. So I did what I've always done. I smiled, a thin, practiced smile that covered the ache. I let the room carry on with its laughter, even as it hollowed me out inside. But then, something happened I hadn't expected. From the far end of the table, a man cleared his throat. He was a quiet guest that night, invited under a different pretense, one Daniel hadn't even questioned. He set down his glass, folded his napkin, and rose to his feet. His voice was steady, professional, but edged with something unmistakable. Correction. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, eyes fixed on me. "May I have a word?" The room fell into silence. Forks paused mid-air. My son's smug grin faltered. Because the man speaking was not a relative. He was not a neighbour. He was Mr. Collins, the manager of the local bank. And the way he said my name carried the weight of truths my son had no idea were about to surface. When I was a girl, my mother used to say, "Children are like seeds, you pour your best into the soil, but you don't get to decide what grows." I never understood what she meant until now. Daniel was my seed, my firstborn, and for so many years, I believed he would grow into a man his father and I could be proud of. Robert and I were ordinary people. We didn't inherit wealth. We built our lives brick by brick, dollar by dollar. Robert worked with his hands until the calluses hardened like stone. I worked in the school library, cataloguing books, reading aloud to restless children, reminding them that knowledge was worth more than anything money could buy. Our house, the one that hosted Christmas dinners year after year, was purchased on long evenings of Robert taking side jobs and me sewing clothes late into the night. We didn't take vacations. We didn't buy new cars. Everything we had went toward that home, our children, and their futures. And for Daniel, we gave more than we had to give. He was bright, ambitious, and always hungry for more. We scraped together savings to send him to a good college. I remember mailing off tuition checks and holding my breath until the bank confirmed they'd cleared. Robert even sold one of his work trucks to cover Daniel's final semester. We told ourselves it was worth it. He would have opportunities we never had. At first, it seemed to pay off. He graduated, landed a good job in finance, married Lisa, a woman who carried herself like the world owed her a stage. I tried to embrace her, to love her as a daughter. But Lisa had a way of curling her lip when she looked around my modest house, as if every piece of furniture was beneath her. Over the years, I noticed Daniel changing too. He stopped bringing me flowers on Mother's Day. He stopped asking how I managed on my own after Robert died. When I called, he was always too busy. And when money came up, I caught the flicker in his eyes, annoyance, like my careful saving and modest living embarrassed him. The first sting came years before that Christmas dinner. Daniel and Lisa had come over one summer afternoon, their SUV pulling into the driveway like a glossy advertisement. Lisa had looked around my yard and said with a smile too sharp to be kind, "Mum, don't you think it's time to downsize? I mean, this place is a lot for you. We could help manage things. You'd be more comfortable in a condo." I knew what she meant. She wanted the house. My house. The one Robert's hands had built into a home. I'd laughed it off then, but it stuck with me, a warning I didn't want to admit. And Daniel? He didn't even defend me. He just shrugged and said, "She's right, Mum. It's not practical for you anymore." That was the moment I realized my son wasn't protecting me anymore. He was circling me, like a vulture waiting for the moment I'd be too weak to fight. But nothing compared to what he said after Christmas dinner that year. When the dishes had been cleared and the guests had begun to leave, I pulled Daniel aside in the hallway. My voice was calm, but I could hear the strain in it. "Daniel," I said quietly, "what you said at the table was cruel. Do you realize how that sounded? In front of your children? In front of everyone?" He looked down at me with that same dismissive smirk I'd seen all night. "Mum, it was just a joke. Everyone laughed. Don't take everything so seriously." I shook my head. "It wasn't a joke to me." His smile slipped into impatience. "Look, Mum, let's be honest. You don't have much. You live off a pension and whatever Dad left you. It's not like you can keep up anymore. People see it. I just said it out loud." The words cut deeper than he knew. I stared at him, my own child, and for the first time, I saw not a boy I raised, but a man who had convinced himself I was disposable. He patted my shoulder, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Don't worry about it. Lisa and I will take care of things eventually. You just focus on enjoying what's left." What's left? I wanted to cry, but instead I nodded. because that's what mothers do. But inside, something shifted. For the first time, I wondered if Robert had been right. Before he passed, he'd made me promise to protect our legacy not from strangers, but from the very people we thought we were building it for. That night, lying awake in my quiet house, Daniel's words replayed over and over. Broke. Disposable. What's left? I thought of the bank manager sitting at my table, his eyes flickering with knowledge Daniel didn't have. I thought of the files tucked away in my desk papers Robert and I had once pored over with quiet determination. And I realized Daniel thought he knew my worth, but he didn't know half of it. The clatter of silverware had barely faded when Mr. Collins rose from his chair. At first, no one seemed to understand why he was there. He wasn't family, though he'd been introduced politely at the start of the evening. Daniel had hardly acknowledged him, assuming, I think, that he was some quiet friend I'd invited to fill a seat. But the way the room hushed when he cleared his throat told me everyone suddenly sensed there was more to it. Mrs. Lawson, he said, his voice measured and formal. I believe now might be the right time. My heart gave a painful jolt. I hadn't planned for the timing to unfold like this, not at the height of Christmas dinner. I had asked Mr. Collins weeks earlier to stop by with some paperwork. He was supposed to meet me afterward in the study, but fate has its own timing, doesn't it? And sometimes it reveals the truth in the very moment lies are spoken. Daniel laughed uneasily. Wait a second. You're here on business? At my mother's dinner table? Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses, calm as ever. Not business, Mr. Lawson. Clarification. His eyes swept the table, lingering on the faces now watching him as if he'd brought a playbill and opened the curtain. I couldn't help but overhear your comment that your mother is broke. He let the word hang there, heavy and ugly, before turning his gaze back to Daniel. That is, in fact, not the case. The silence was suffocating. Lisa shifted in her seat, her smile tightening like a wire. Evelyn looked down at her hands, uncomfortable but curious. The grandchildren blinked, sensing something important though they didn't understand. And Daniel, his smirk cracked, replaced by a flash of something raw. Panic. Excuse me, he said sharply. What do you mean? Mr. Collins folded his hands in front of him. What I mean, sir, is that your mother is a valued client at the bank. She has accounts in good standing, investments intact, and considerable assets under her name. She is not broke. My cheeks flushed with heat. Not from shame this time, but from the unexpected defense. I hadn't asked him to say this, but hearing the words spoken out loud, in front of my family, filled me with a strange, quiet strength. Daniel barked a laugh, too loud, too forced. All right, come on. What kind of stunt is this? Mom asked you to say this, didn't she? Some sort of performance to, what? Make me look bad? Mr. Collins didn't flinch. I assure you, Mr. Lawson, I'm stating only facts. Facts that, until now, have been of no one's concern but your mother's. Lisa leaned forward, her voice sharp. Then why bring it up now? This is wildly inappropriate. I lifted a hand, silencing her. My voice was steady. Because lies don't get to linger at my table, Lisa. Not when they're about me. Daniel's face darkened. He looked at me as though I had betrayed him, when all I had done was sit there, absorbing his cruelty. Mum, he hissed under his breath. You're making me look like a fool. I wanted to say, you don't need my help for that. But I bit my tongue. Instead, I simply met his eyes and let him see the hurt his words had carved into me. Around the table, the air shifted. No one laughed now. Evelyn cleared her throat softly, her eyes darting between me and her brother. One of the grandchildren whispered, Grandma's not broke, as though the idea was too strange to believe. Mr. Collins gently placed a folder on the table, the kind that snapped with authority when opened. These, he said quietly, are documents your mother asked me to bring. proof of ownership, proof of stability, proof that she is far from helpless. The folder sat there, unopened, a weight heavier than the roast turkey had been. Daniel stared at it like it might explode. Lisa pressed a hand to his arm, murmuring something low and urgent. But Daniel shook her off, his pride pricked, his anger rising. "You didn't need to do this, Mum," he said through clenched teeth. "You didn't need to parade your finances in front of everyone. It's embarrassing." I tilted my head, studying him. Embarrassing? Or inconvenient? His jaw clenched, and for the first time, he looked less like the son I raised, and more like a stranger, a man whose greed had been fed too long, who couldn't bear to see his picture of me corrected. Dinner ended in a haze of stiff smiles and unfinished pie. Guests trickled out, murmuring goodbyes, though their eyes flickered with curiosity. Evelyn lingered, hugging me tightly before leaving, her silence carrying more weight than words. When the door finally closed and the house fell quiet again, Daniel stayed behind. His eyes blazed. "What are you playing at, Mum? Inviting your banker to dinner? Showing off? Do you know how humiliating that was for me?" Humiliating. Not cruel. Not wrong. Not hurtful to his mother. Only humiliating to him. That night, when he stormed out with Lisa hissing behind him, I sat alone in my armchair and realized something. Daniel wasn't embarrassed because I'd been accused of being broke. He was embarrassed because, in that moment, his grip on my story, on my finances, on his assumption of my weakness, had cracked. And cracks, I knew, have a way of splitting open. The morning after Christmas dinner, the house felt colder than usual, not just from the December frost on the windows, but from the echo of Daniel's words still hanging in the walls. Broke, disposable, words meant to reduce me, to strip me of dignity. But I wasn't reduced, not anymore. For years, Robert had insisted we prepare for storms we couldn't predict. He was a man who believed in locks on every door, fire extinguishers in every room, and careful records in every drawer. When he was diagnosed with cancer, his concern was not for himself, but for me. "Marion," he had whispered one evening, his hand fragile but firm in mine. "Don't ever let anyone corner you, especially not family. Promise me you'll keep the deeds in your name. Promise me you'll keep the accounts where only you can touch them. Don't hand them the power to hurt you." I promised, and I kept that promise. Which is why, when Daniel sneered about me being broke, I didn't crumble, because I knew the truth. Robert's careful planning and my own meant the home we built, the savings we scraped together, the investments that quietly grew over decades. They were all still under my name. Safe. Waiting. The week before Christmas, I had already met with Mr. Collins at the bank. We'd spent hours reviewing documents, checking balances, updating beneficiary designations. He was patient, kind, and thorough, explaining each form before I signed. I told him plainly that I no longer trusted my son to act in my best interest. "Then we'll make sure he can't," Mr. Collins had said, sliding the papers across the desk. Together, we'd updated my will. We placed safeguards on my accounts, so no one, not even Daniel, could access them without me present. And most importantly, we reviewed the deed to the house, still mine, entirely mine. A fact I let settle into my bones like warmth on a winter morning. That was my quiet power. Daniel thought of me as a frail old woman clinging to memories, but I had something stronger than youth or charm. I had preparation. I had proof. And if it came to it, I had the ability to shift everything away from him with a single signature. I remembered the look on his face when Mr. Collins had spoken at the dinner table, that flicker of panic, the twitch of pride wounded in front of others. He thought he held the reins of my story, but he was beginning to see they were slipping from his hands. And that thought, painful as it was, gave me clarity. The days after Christmas passed in a blur of phone calls and whispered arguments. Daniel rang twice, his voice sharp, demanding explanations. Why would you invite a banker into our family dinner, Mum? Do you realize how ridiculous that looked? People are talking. I listened quietly, letting him vent. Then, when he ran out of steam, I asked, why did you feel the need to tell everyone I was broke, Daniel? Do you realize how cruel that sounded? His silence was brief, but telling. Then he said flatly, because you are broke, or you will be soon. You can't keep living like this forever. And when the time comes, Lisa and I will have to step in. Better to get everyone used to the idea now. Step in. That was his plan, not to support me, not to care for me as I aged, but to step in like a man circling property he expected to inherit. I ended the call without another word. My hands shook afterward, not from fear, but from fury. Robert's voice echoed in my head again. Don't hand them the power to hurt you. So I didn't. I gathered my papers, filed them neatly into a locked cabinet, and placed the key on a chain around my neck. Every time I felt the weight of it, I remembered that I wasn't defenseless. And then, quietly, I began a new plan. I arranged another meeting with my lawyer, Mrs. Graham, a sharp woman with grey hair like mine, and a gaze that missed nothing. I explained what had happened at Christmas, how my son had humiliated me, how I feared he would try to push harder. She listened, her fingers tapping lightly on her legal pad. You've done the right thing, Mrs. Lawson. We'll draft protections he can't override. If he tries to coerce you, or if there's evidence of undue pressure, the law will not be on his side. The law, my quiet ally. For the first time in months, I slept soundly that night. Not because Daniel's cruelty hurt less, but because I knew I wasn't at his mercy. Daniel thought he'd declared the truth at Christmas dinner, but the real truth was this. The power he assumed was already slipping away, and soon he would learn just how much he underestimated me. The week after New Year's, Daniel showed up at my doorstep without calling. Lisa was with him, her perfume announcing her presence before she even crossed the threshold. They stepped inside as though they owned the place, shedding coats, brushing snow from their shoes, barely offering a greeting. I had just set the kettle on for tea. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet I cherished, the hum of the furnace, the tick of the clock on the wall. But their arrival brought with it a storm. Daniel wasted no time. Mum, we need to talk. I gestured toward the living room. Then sit, the kettle's on. But neither of them sat. Lisa crossed her arms, her manicured nails tapping against her sleeve. Daniel paced the rug like a man rehearsing his lines. He stopped in front of me. We can't have another scene like Christmas. That was humiliating. I raised an eyebrow. Humiliating for you? Or for me? His jaw tightened. You know what I mean. Having your banker stand up in front of everyone, waving around papers that was unnecessary. I met his eyes calmly. I didn't wave anything around. Mr. Collins corrected a lie, one you told. Lisa cut in, her voice sharp as broken glass. You're blowing this out of proportion, Marion. Daniel was just trying to lighten the mood, but instead, you've made it a spectacle. People are talking. Do you want the whole family thinking you're paranoid? Paranoid. The word stung, not because it was true, but because I knew it was deliberate. Gaslighting, the younger generation calls it. I call it cruelty in disguise. I folded my hands in my lap. I don't care what the family thinks, Lisa. I care about the truth. And the truth is, I'm not broke. And I won't sit quietly while my son tells the world I am. Daniel's face reddened. Mum, you can't keep holding on like this. The house, the accounts, it's too much. You're not young anymore. What happens when you can't manage? What happens when you forget things? You'll need us to take over. That's just reality. There it was. The real reason for their sudden concern. Not love, not care. Control. I stood, slowly, letting the weight of my age be seen, but not mistaken for weakness. I'm 72, Daniel, not senile. I manage just fine. And as for the house and accounts, they're mine to manage until the day I decide otherwise. Lisa's lips curled. Or until you're forced to. The room chilled. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no warmth in her eyes. Only calculation. It was the same look I'd seen years ago when she'd suggested I downsize. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mum, why are you being so difficult? We're trying to help you, but if you keep pushing us away, don't expect us to keep bailing you out. I laughed softly, the sound startling even me. Bailing me out? Daniel, I've never once asked you for money, not once. Your father and I carried ourselves, and when he passed, I carried myself still. You've never paid a bill in this house. You've never filled my fridge. Don't twist this into something it isn't. The kettle whistled then, shrill and insistent. I let it scream for a moment before moving to the kitchen, pouring hot water into my cup. My hands were steady. Behind me, Lisa hissed. This is pointless, Daniel. She's stubborn. Let her dig her own grave. I turned back, steam rising from the mug in my hand. My grave will be dug in its time, Lisa, but it won't be you standing over it, counting what you think you're owed. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Daniel grabbed her arm. Come on, he muttered. We'll talk later. They left in a flurry of slammed doors and exhaust fumes. When the silence returned, it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing, the way silence feels when you know another storm is coming. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out Robert's old ledger. His neat handwriting filled the pages, tracking every expense, every investment, every decision that built our life. I traced the ink with my finger, remembering his voice. Don't hand them the power to hurt you. Daniel thought I was clinging to scraps. What he didn't realize was that every document in that ledger, every deed in my cabinet, every account statement tucked neatly in my files, they weren't scraps. They were shields. And if he kept pressing, I was prepared to use them. The phone rang the next morning. Evelyn's voice came through, hesitant. Mum, Daniel called me. He says you embarrassed him, that you're making things harder than they need to be. He asked me to talk to you, to convince you. I closed my eyes. Even my daughter, gentle as she was, had been pulled into his orbit. Evelyn, I said softly, your brother is angry because he doesn't have what he wants. But this isn't about what he wants. It's about what's right. Do you understand? She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, I do, Mum. I'm sorry. When I hung up, I felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that at least one child still saw me clearly. Sorrow that the other had turned so far away. But sorrow couldn't stop me now, because every confrontation, every cruel word, only strengthened my resolve. And Daniel was about to learn that the mother he dismissed as weak had more fight left in her than he could imagine. By the middle of January, the snow outside lay heavy on the trees, muffling the world in silence. But inside me, there was no silence. There was a fire, the kind that comes when you've been pushed too far and finally realize you don't have to stand still anymore. After Daniel and Lisa stormed out, I spent days sorting through every file Robert and I had ever kept. Deeds, account ledgers, insurance policies, tax returns, pages of proof that we had worked hard, saved wisely, and secured everything under my name. I stacked them neatly on my dining table, the same table where Daniel had humiliated me weeks earlier. But this time, the papers weren't symbols of shame. They were weapons. When I met Mrs. Graham again, my lawyer, sharp-eyed and steady, she listened carefully as I described Daniel's visit. She didn't look surprised. Families change when money is at stake, she said. But the good news is, you've prepared for this. Now we'll make it ironclad. I want my grandchildren taken care of, I told her. Not Daniel, not Lisa. The children deserve stability, education, chances. He's had enough of mine. and I won't leave him the power to waste Robert's sacrifices." She nodded. "We can structure it so that their inheritance bypasses him entirely. He won't touch a cent. And if he tries to contest, the will itself will penalize him." "Penalize?" I asked, leaning forward. She smiled thinly. "Yes. It's called a no contest clause. If Daniel challenges the will, he'll lose even the small courtesy inheritance we leave him. It's a trap of his own making if he tries." I sat back, letting the words sink in. A trap. Not just defense offense. Robert would have liked that. Over the following weeks, I signed documents, updated accounts, and created a trust that locked everything in place. Each pen stroke felt like fortification, a brick wall rising between me and Daniel's greed. By February, the work was finished. My home, my savings, Robert's remaining investments all secured. My grandchildren were the beneficiaries. Evelyn, too, was included, though modestly. She'd never asked for anything, and that was exactly why she deserved to be remembered. Daniel's name appeared only once, in a token line of inheritance so small it would sting worse than exclusion. And if he dared to contest, he'd lose even that. The first time he heard about the changes was at another family gathering, this time Evelyn's birthday. We were seated in her living room, balloons tied to chairs, children shrieking over cake. It should have been a peaceful day, but Daniel couldn't resist circling me like a hawk. He leaned close while the others sang, his voice low. "I know what you've been doing, Mum. Evelyn mentioned lawyers. You think you can cut me out, after everything I've done for this family?" I turned to him, calm, my fork still in hand. "Everything you've done, Daniel. Remind me. What exactly have you done for this family?" His face flushed, his jaw tightening. "I've kept our name respected. I've built my own career. I've carried—" "No," I interrupted gently. "You've carried your pride, that's all. And if you want respect, you'll have to earn it." Lisa appeared at his side then, her voice sharp. "This is ridiculous. You're an old woman playing games with papers. Daniel is your son. He deserves everything you have. That's how family works." I looked at her steady. "Family works on love, Lisa. On sacrifice. On loyalty. Those things can't be claimed like property. They have to be given. And I've seen where yours lies." For a moment, she looked taken aback, then sneered, pulling Daniel aside. Their whispers were angry, frantic. I could see the storm brewing in his eyes, but I didn't flinch, because unlike him, I had no reason to fear the future. That night, after the party ended, Evelyn walked me to my car. Her breath puffed in the cold as she asked, "Mum, is it true that you've made changes?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it had to be done." She squeezed my hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for protecting them, for protecting us." In that moment, the ache of betrayal lightened just a little, because while one child had turned against me, another stood by my side. Later, sitting alone in my car before starting the engine, I whispered to Robert, as if he were in the passenger seat, "It's done, love. The legacy you built won't be squandered. I've set the trap. If Daniel lunges, he'll only catch himself." And I realized then, Daniel hadn't humiliated me at Christmas dinner. He'd revealed, and in doing so, he'd handed me the resolve to do what I should have done years ago. March, thawing snow and grey skies. But inside my home, the storm was only beginning. Daniel had gone quiet for weeks after Evelyn's birthday, too quiet. I knew my son well enough to understand silence wasn't surrender. It was plotting. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. His tone was clipped, businesslike. "Mum, I'm coming over. We need to settle this once and for all." I didn't ask what this meant. I already knew. When he arrived, Lisa was with him, dressed sharply in a tailored coat, her expression tight with anticipation. They didn't sit. They didn't even take off their shoes. They came with a purpose. Daniel dropped a folder onto my coffee table. Papers slid out, some official-looking, others scrawled with his handwriting. "Power of attorney," he said flatly. "It's time you signed. We'll take care of the bills, the property, the accounts. You don't need the stress anymore." I stared at the papers, my heart heavy but steady. This wasn't concern. It was conquest. Lisa leaned forward, her voice low and syrupy. "It's for your own good, Marion. You're tired. We've seen it. This way, Daniel can handle everything. Smoothly, respectfully. Respectfully. As though stripping me of control was an act of kindness. I looked up at my son. "And what happens when I sign, Daniel? What happens then?" His jaw clenched. "Then we can move forward. No more embarrassing scenes. No more whispers about whether you're capable. You'll be cared for. That's what family does." I let the silence hang for a long moment. Then, with deliberate calm, I reached into the drawer of my end table and pulled out my own folder. Thicker, heavier. I set it directly on top of his papers. "These," I said quietly, "are my updated legal documents, the ones my lawyer prepared, the ones Mr. Collins has copies of at the bank." Daniel blinked. Lisa's lips parted, the color draining from her face. I opened the folder, sliding out the first page, my will. "You see, Daniel, I've already ensured everything is accounted for. The house, the accounts, the investments. They go directly to my grandchildren. You will not control them. Not 1 cent. His face reddened, his hand curling into a fist. "You can't just cut me out. I'm your son." I held his gaze. "And a son who humiliates his mother at Christmas dinner. A son who circles like a vulture, waiting for her to be too weak to fight. That kind of son does not inherit trust, Daniel. He loses it." Lisa tried to interject, but I cut her off with a look sharper than any word. "And in case you're thinking of contesting," I continued, tapping the page, "you'll want to read this line, the no contest clause. If you challenge my will, you forfeit the token inheritance I left you. The more you fight, the less you have." The silence that followed was suffocating. Daniel's voice finally cracked. "This isn't fair. I've worked hard. I've earned. My voice was stronger than I expected. "You've earned nothing from me. Everything Robert and I built was through sacrifice. You had your chance to inherit more than money, Daniel. You could have inherited kindness, responsibility, respect. But you squandered them." He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Lisa looked at him, her face hardening, realization settling in. The trap had been sprung. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I stood and opened it to reveal Mr. Collins, right on time for the appointment I had scheduled days earlier. He stepped inside, nodded politely at Daniel and Lisa, then looked at me. "Mrs. Lawson," he said warmly, "just here to confirm everything is finalized. The documents are secure. The accounts are untouchable without your consent." "Exactly as you requested." Daniel went pale. His eyes darted to the banker, then back to me, his voice a whisper. "You set me up." I straightened, dignity in every line of my posture. "No, Daniel, you set yourself up. I just made sure the truth couldn't be twisted anymore." The fury drained from him, replaced by something sadder defeat. He gathered his useless papers, shoving them back into the folder with trembling hands. Lisa muttered something bitter under her breath, but I barely heard her. They left, without another word. The door shut behind them, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my chest. I wasn't broke, I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't disposable. The legacy Robert and I built would live on, not through greed, but through the grandchildren who would someday understand the battles I fought to protect it. As I poured myself a cup of tea, steam curling in the air, I thought of Christmas night, of Daniel's cruel joke, of the laughter at my expense. And I realized something simple, something steady. They had tried to bury me in shame, but all they did was plant me deeper in resolve. The house was quiet again, not the heavy, suffocating quiet of tension, but the kind of silence that feels earned like a deep breath after a storm. In the days after Daniel's failed attempt, I moved through my routines with a steadier step. I made my tea in the mornings, fed the birds that gathered at my window, and read by the soft lamplight in the evenings. But everything felt different, as if the very walls of my home knew they were safe now. The calls from Daniel stopped. For once, there were no demands, no veiled insults, no pushing me toward the grave before my time. Lisa, too, went silent, perhaps too busy calculating her next move, or perhaps realizing there were no moves left to make. But Evelyn called more often, sometimes just to chat, sometimes to ask for advice, sometimes to bring the grandchildren over for dinner. One evening, as the children played with the old toy chest Robert had built years ago, Evelyn hugged me in the kitchen and whispered, "You're stronger than I'll ever be, Mum." I shook my head, smiling. "No, darling, you're stronger than you know. You just haven't had to prove it yet." It was strange, the way betrayal and protection could coexist. Daniel's cruelty had cut me deeply, yes, but in wounding me, he had also given me clarity. I no longer had to wonder where his loyalty lay. I no longer had to live in the illusion that my sacrifices guaranteed his respect. The truth hurt, but it freed me. I began to write letters to each of my grandchildren, not about money, not about inheritance, but about life, about the lessons Robert and I had learned, the value of work, the dignity of honesty, the strength in kindness. I tucked each letter into the trust folder, alongside the documents that would someday provide for their education and future. Because wealth alone is not a legacy. It is the wisdom that shapes what they do with it. And I wanted them to remember me, not as a woman who was mocked at a Christmas table, but as a grandmother who stood her ground with quiet resolve. On a Sunday in early spring, I sat on the porch with Evelyn. The air was still crisp, but the first buds of green were pushing through the branches. She asked me, carefully, "Do you regret it, Mum? Cutting him out?" I took a long breath, watching the children chase each other across the yard. Daniel's children. My grandchildren. "I regret that it came to this," I admitted. "No mother dreams of protecting herself from her own son, but I don't regret the choice. Because I had to protect more than myself, I had to protect them. If Daniel had his way, everything would be squandered. The house, the savings, the stability. And then what would be left for these little ones? Just dust." Evelyn nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of Robert. I thought of the Christmas dinners we used to host together, his booming laugh filling the room, his hands carving the turkey, his eyes twinkling as the children unwrapped gifts. I thought of the promise I'd made him to protect what we built, no matter the cost. And I realized I had kept that promise. The betrayal no longer haunted me. It had shaped me. It had forced me to step forward when I might otherwise have stayed still. I remembered Daniel's words at Christmas. "Mum's broke. Don't expect gifts." The laughter that followed, the sting of humiliation, the way I had smiled through it. And now, months later, I smiled again, not to cover pain, but to acknowledge victory. Because I wasn't broke. Not then, not now, not ever. I was rich in the things Daniel could never take: resolve, dignity, and the wisdom to know when to fight. And I had given my family the part of it that still deserved my love, the greatest gift of all: protection. So when my days finally come to an end, and they gather again at this old brick house, they won't remember me as weak or poor. They'll remember me as the woman who stood her ground. And that, I think, is the best inheritance I could leave behind.